The research colony on Zirion Prime was supposed to be a simple evacuation: get in, extract the civilian scientists, get out before the Void Hunters could organize a proper assault. Captain David Stone had run dozens of similar operations with Iron Phoenix, his mercenary unit specializing in impossible rescues that legitimate military forces wouldn't touch. Perimeter sweep complete, Sergeant Lisa Park's voice crackled through his comm unit. No hostile contacts within 2 clicks of the landing zone. We might actually get lucky on this one. David wished he shared her optimism as he studied the tactical display showing the colony's layout. The research facility sprawled across a series of interconnected domes, each one a potential death trap if the Void Hunters breached the outer defenses. His team had maybe 30 minutes before the raiding fleet arrived in force. "Remember, this is a snatch and grab," he told his squad as they approached the colony's main airlock. "Civilians first, scientific equipment second, heroics never. We're not here to win a war." The colony's interior hummed with the frantic energy of an evacuation in progress. Scientists and support staff loaded essential research materials onto transport carts while automated systems prepared to purge sensitive data. David's practiced eye cataloged escape routes and defensive positions, noting the facility's strengths and vulnerabilities. Captain Stone. A tall, elegant figure approached from the central laboratory complex. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the colony's director, looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank God you're here. We have 93 personnel to evacuate, including some very important visitors." "Important how?" David asked, checking his chronometer. 28 minutes. Queen Serafina Velthera of the Aetherian Empire is conducting diplomatic research in our quantum crystalline labs. She has 6 members of her scientific delegation with her. David felt his chest tighten. Aetherian royalty changed everything about the mission parameters. Queen Serafina was known throughout the galaxy not just for her political leadership but for her groundbreaking research in quantum mechanics and her species' commitment to peaceful coexistence. If she died on his watch, it would trigger an interstellar incident that could destabilize half the known systems. "Where is she now?" David asked. "Level 7, Quantum Research Wing." She insisted on completing some kind of critical measurement sequence before evacuation. Dr. Vasquez's expression suggested she'd already tried arguing with Aetherian royal determination. Her people are focused. The facility's alarm system chose that moment to scream warnings about incoming hostile contacts. Through the colony's transparent aluminum viewports, David could see the distinctive energy signatures of Void Hunter attack craft dropping out of hyperspace ahead of schedule. "Change of plans," David announced to his team. "Park, take Alpha Squad and start moving civilians to the evac ships. Williams, Beta Squad handles the scientific equipment. I'm going after the Queen." "Sir," Lieutenant Jake Williams protested, "regulations state that VIP extraction requires a full squad escort." "Regulations also state that we don't leave people behind," David replied, checking his weapon's power cell. "Get those civilians moving. I'll bring up the rear with our royal guests." The journey to Level 7 took him through corridors filled with the organized chaos of emergency evacuation. David's tactical training cataloged every detail: structural weak points, ammunition storage, medical supplies, while his mind focused on the mission clock ticking down with mechanical precision. The quantum research labs occupied the colony's most secure section, their crystalline walls designed to contain exotic energy experiments that could theoretically tear holes in spacetime. David found Queen Serafina exactly where Dr. Vasquez had indicated, standing before a massive array of floating quantum crystals that pulsed with inner light. She was beautiful in the otherworldly way that marked her species, tall and graceful, with luminescent markings that traced delicate patterns across her silver-blue skin. Her eyes held depths that suggested intelligence spanning centuries, and her movements carried the fluid precision of someone accustomed to manipulating forces beyond human comprehension. "Your Majesty," David said, approaching with the careful respect that diplomatic protocols required, "we need to evacuate immediately. Hostile forces have reached the system." Queen Seraphina turned from her instruments, and David felt a strange sensation, as if she were somehow looking through his eyes into his intentions. Her telepathic abilities were legendary, though she was known for using them respectfully. "Captain Stone," she said, her voice carrying musical harmonics that made standards sound like poetry. "Dr. Vasquez told me to expect you. I need perhaps 5 more minutes to complete these readings. The quantum resonance patterns we're observing here could revolutionize our understanding of dimensional stability." "Ma'am, with respect, we don't have 5 minutes," David replied as the facility shuddered under the impact of Void Hunter energy weapons. "My job is to get you and your people to safety." The lights flickered, and emergency power kicked in with a low hum that David recognized as the sound of primary systems failing. Through the lab's viewing ports, he could see Void Hunter assault ships landing on the colony's outer platforms, disgorging the savage raiders who showed no mercy to scientific personnel or diplomatic missions. "Very well," Queen Seraphina said, her luminescent markings shifting to patterns that David's briefings had taught him indicated resignation mixed with determination. "My people are prepared to leave." That's when the explosion started, and David realized that simple evacuation had just become a fighting retreat through enemy-occupied territory. The first Void Hunter breach came through the facility's eastern corridor, savage raiders in crude-powered armor pouring through the ruptured airlock like a tide of destruction. David's comm unit exploded with tactical chatter as his team coordinated defensive positions throughout the colony. "Alpha Squad, report," David ordered, guiding Queen Seraphina and her delegation through the Quantum Lab's emergency exit. "Heavy resistance on level 3, Sergeant Park's voice came back strained with combat stress. "We've got 30 civilians moving toward the evac ships, but the Void Hunters are pushing hard on our flanks." David felt the familiar calm that came with combat, his training taking over as he analyzed the tactical situation. The colony's design worked against them. Too many corridors, too many access points for a small team to defend effectively. They needed to move fast and hit hard, buying time for the civilians to reach safety. "Your Majesty," he said to Queen Seraphina as they navigated the service tunnels that connected the research levels, "I need you to stay close and follow my lead exactly. These raiders don't take prisoners." "I understand," she replied, her luminescent markings now showing patterns that David's briefings had identified as indicating battle readiness. Despite her species' pacifist reputation, Queen Seraphina moved with the controlled grace of someone prepared for violence. The route to the evac ships should have been straightforward, up 3 levels, across the main laboratory complex, out through the primary airlock. Instead, they encountered Void Hunter forces at every junction, savage fighters whose brutal efficiency had made them the terror of the outer colonies. David's first injury came during a firefight in the main corridor, a plasma bolt that burned through his tactical armor and left a searing line across his ribs. He kept moving, returning fire while shepherding the Aetherian delegation toward relative safety. "Captain," one of Queen Seraphina's scientists called out, "there are wounded civilians trapped in Laboratory 6. The Void Hunters have them pinned down." Through the smoke and chaos, David could hear the distinctive sound of civilian screams mixed with enemy weapons fire. His tactical training said to leave them. The mission was to extract the Queen and her people, not to attempt impossible rescue operations that would endanger everyone. His conscience said otherwise. "Your Majesty, continue to the evac ships with my team," David ordered, sealing his helmet and checking his weapon's ammunition counter. "I'm going back for those people." "Captain, that's tactically unsound," Queen Seraphina protested, her telepathic abilities apparently picking up on his emotional state. "You'll be outnumbered and cut off from support." "Ma'am, with respect, I don't leave people behind." The fighting retreat through Laboratory 6 cost David dearly. Void Hunter energy weapons punched through his depleted armor, leaving deep burns across his chest and arms. Crystalline shrapnel from destroyed equipment opened cuts across his face and shoulders, while enemy claws raked across his back during brutal close-quarters combat. But he kept moving, kept fighting, kept creating a path to safety for 7 civilian researchers who would have died without intervention. Each injury was a price paid for lives saved, each scar a mark of commitment that transcended military obligation. By the time David reached the evac ships with the rescued civilians, his armor was in tatters and his body bore the permanent marks of his choice to value others' lives above his own safety. Queen Seraphina was waiting at the ship's medical bay, her luminescent markings pulsing with what he would later learn was deep concern mixed with something approaching awe. "You went back," she said as the ship's medical systems began emergency treatment. "Despite the tactical impossibility, despite the risk to your own life, you went back for people you'd never met." David tried to respond, but blood loss and exhaustion were finally claiming their toll. As consciousness faded, he was dimly aware of Queen Seraphina's hands on his damaged armor, her luminescent markings blazing with healing energy that seemed to flow directly from her life force into his injuries. "Rest, Captain," her voice followed him into darkness. "You have earned it." When David finally awakened 3 days later aboard the Aetherian medical frigate, his body was covered in healing gel and biosynthetic bandages. Queen Seraphina sat beside his medical pod, her expression mixing relief with something deeper that her telepathic abilities couldn't quite conceal. "The civilians you rescued," she said quietly, "are all alive and recovering. Your actions saved 7 lives at considerable cost to yourself." David tried to sit up, wincing at the pull of healing tissue across his ribs and shoulders. "Just doing my job, Your Majesty." "No," Queen Seraphina replied, her luminescent markings shifting to patterns that spoke of profound respect. "You did far more than duty required. You chose to value unknown lives above your own safety, and you will bear the marks of that choice forever." As David looked down at his healing body, he could see that she was right. The burns, cuts, and puncture wounds would heal, but they would leave permanent scars, a map of sacrifice written across his skin in lines of courage and commitment. He had no idea that those scars would one day tell a story that would change both their lives forever. 6 months later, the scars had healed into permanent reminders of Xerion Prime etched across David's body. The burn lines from Void Hunter plasma weapons traced silver paths across his ribs and arms, while the crystalline shrapnel had left jagged marks across his left shoulder that looked like abstract art carved in flesh. The claw marks across his back had faded to thin white lines, but they remained visible enough that other soldiers sometimes stared when they saw him in the barracks. "You've become something of a legend," Lieutenant Williams observed as they prepared for their next mission briefing. "Half the guys think you're crazy, the other half want to be assigned to your squad." David finished adjusting his tactical vest, the familiar weight of equipment helping him focus on the present rather than dwelling on memories that still carried the echo of plasma fire and civilian screams. "Legends don't pay the bills, Williams. Focus on the mission parameters." But focusing had become more difficult since Xerion Prime. The physical scars were matched by psychological ones, survivors' guilt mixed with questions about whether his actions had truly made a difference. 7 civilians saved, but dozens more had died throughout the outer colonies during similar Void Hunter raids. The mathematics of heroism never quite balanced. Iron Phoenix has been requested for diplomatic security detail on Centauri Station, Captain Sarah Kim announced during the morning briefing. High-profile interspecies summit, maximum security protocols, minimum engagement rules. David groaned internally. Diplomatic security meant standing around looking professional while politicians made speeches about galactic cooperation. It was necessary work, but hardly the kind of mission that made use of Iron Phoenix's specialized rescue capabilities. "Who's the principal?" Sergeant Park asked, reviewing the mission dossier on her tablet. "Queen Seraphina Velthara of the Aetherian Empire," Captain Kim replied. "She specifically requested our unit for her personal security detail." The name hit David like a physical blow, bringing back memories of luminescent markings pulsing with healing energy, of musical voices speaking words of gratitude and respect, of telepathic connections that had somehow bridged the gap between species and understanding. "Sir." Williams was looking at him with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "The Queen and I have history," David said, which was both true and completely inadequate as an explanation for the complex emotions her name evoked. Centauri Station was a marvel of interspecies architecture, its modular construction allowing for different environmental zones that could accommodate the atmospheric requirements of dozens of different civilizations. The diplomatic quarters were particularly impressive, with living spaces that could be adjusted for everything from methane-breathing gas giants natives to silicon-based rock dwellers. David's team established security protocols in the Etherian delegation quarters, checking sight lines and escape routes while trying not to stare at the alien technology that seemed to grow organically from crystalline matrices rather than being assembled from discrete components. "The Queen will arrive at 1400 hours, her advance aide informed David during the security briefing. She has requested a private meeting with Captain Stone to discuss specific protection protocols." When Queen Seraphina entered the secure conference room, David felt the same strange sensation he remembered from their first meeting, as if she could see through his careful professional facade to the thoughts and emotions he tried to keep hidden. 6 months had not diminished her otherworldly beauty or the sense of ancient wisdom that seemed to surround her like an invisible aura. "Captain Stone," she said, her voice carrying the same musical harmonics that had made Standard sound like poetry. "It is good to see you recovered from your injuries." "Your Majesty," David replied, maintaining the formal distance that diplomatic protocols required even as he struggled with memories of her hands channeling healing energy into his damaged body. "Iron Phoenix is honored to provide security for your delegation." Queen Seraphina studied his face with the intensity that marked her telepathic abilities, though David had learned that she used them respectfully, reading emotional resonance rather than invading private thoughts. "You seem different than I remember," she said finally. The man who risked everything to save strangers on Zirian Prime carried himself with certainty. "Now I sense doubt, perhaps even regret." David felt his carefully maintained professional barriers wavering under her perceptive gaze. "Everyone changes, Your Majesty. Experience teaches us about the cost of our choices." "And what has experience taught you about the value of those choices?" The question struck at the heart of David's ongoing struggle with the aftermath of Zirian Prime. He looked at Queen Seraphina's luminescent markings, which were showing patterns that his briefings had taught him indicated genuine concern mixed with something deeper. "I've learned that saving 7 people doesn't balance against the hundreds who die while you're playing hero," he said, the words carrying more bitterness than he intended. "I've learned that scars fade but doubt doesn't." Queen Seraphina moved closer, and David became aware that her telepathic abilities were focused on him with laser intensity. "Captain, may I ask you something that requires complete honesty?" David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "If you were faced with the same situation again, civilians trapped, overwhelming odds, tactical wisdom demanding retreat, would you make the same choice?" David thought about Laboratory 6, about the sound of civilian screams mixing with weapons fire, about the weight of lives depending on decisions made in seconds rather than hours of careful analysis. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'd go back again." Queen Seraphina's luminescent markings shifted to patterns that spoke of profound satisfaction mixed with something that looked almost like relief. "Then you understand the value of your scars better than you realize," she said softly. "They are not marks of foolish heroism, Captain. They are evidence of a soul that values life above safety, connection above protocol, love above fear." The word love hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither was quite ready to address directly. But David felt something shift in the careful distance he'd been maintaining, as if Queen Seraphina's words had unlocked a door he'd been trying to keep closed. The attack on Centauri Station came without warning during the summit's opening ceremony, coordinated strikes that bypassed external defenses and struck directly at the diplomatic quarters. David's team had drilled for this scenario, but the terrorists possessed inside information that turned careful security protocols into death traps. "Multiple breach points," Sergeant Park reported through the comm static created by enemy jamming equipment. "They're using diplomatic access codes. Someone leaked our security arrangements." David guided Queen Seraphina through the station's emergency corridors as explosions echoed through the superstructure around them. Unlike Zirian Prime's chaotic evacuation, this felt personal, the attackers were specifically targeting the Etherian delegation, using Queen Seraphina's pacifist reputation as a symbol to strike against interspecies cooperation. The secure bunker is 2 levels down, David told her as they navigated through sections of the station that emergency lighting had turned into a maze of shadows and uncertain safety. My team will hold the corridor while we wait for backup. But backup was 20 minutes away, and the terrorists were closing in with military precision that suggested professional training in superior equipment. David's scars ached with phantom pain as adrenaline flooded his system, his body remembering the cost of similar fights. The bunker was a reinforced chamber designed to withstand everything short of direct nuclear impact, its walls lined with quantum-dampening fields that would prevent telepathic tracking or energy weapon penetration. David sealed the entrance behind them and activated the emergency protocols that would alert Fleet Command to their location. 20 minutes, he said, checking his weapons ammunition supply. We hold this position for 20 minutes. Queen Seraphina sat on the bunker's single bench, her luminescent markings pulsing with patterns that indicated controlled fear mixed with determined resolve. In the bunker's dim emergency lighting, David could see her clearly for the first time since the attack began, elegant features marked by stress, but unchanged by the violence swirling around them. "Captain," she said quietly, "if we don't survive this, I want you to know that your actions on Zirion Prime meant more than you realize. Not just the lives you saved, but what you showed me about the nature of true leadership." David felt something tighten in his chest at her words. "Your Majesty, we're going to get through this. I've been in worse situations." "Have you?" Queen Seraphina asked, rising from the bench to move closer to where he stood monitoring the bunker's security feeds. "Or do you say that because you believe your life matters less than the people you protect?" Before David could respond, she did something that shattered every diplomatic protocol he'd ever learned. Her fingers traced the line of scars across his left shoulder, following the jagged marks left by crystalline shrapnel with the reverence usually reserved for sacred texts. "You fought for someone," she whispered, her telepathic abilities allowing her to sense the emotional resonance each scar carried. "Every mark on your body tells a story of choosing others' welfare above your own safety." David felt his carefully maintained professional barriers crumbling under her touch and the intensity of her understanding. The scars she traced were more than just healed wounds, they were a map of every moment he'd chosen to risk everything for strangers, every time he'd valued unknown lives above his own survival. "For you," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I fought for you." The silence that followed seemed to last forever, filled with the sound of distant explosions and the hum of the bunker's life support systems. Queen Seraphina's hand stilled against his scarred shoulder, her luminescent markings shifting through patterns that spoke of shock, understanding, and something deeper that her telepathic abilities couldn't conceal. "David," she said, using his first name for the first time, "do you understand what you're saying?" "I'm saying that when I went back to Laboratory 6, when I took hit after hit to get those civilians to safety, I wasn't thinking about tactical necessity or professional duty." David looked into her eyes, seeing depths of intelligence and compassion that made his heart race. "I was thinking about you watching, about proving that humans could be worthy of the trust you'd placed in us." Queen Seraphina's luminescent markings blazed with emotion that needed no translation. "You bore permanent scars to prove your worth to someone you barely knew. I bore them because saving lives mattered to you, and what mattered to you had somehow become important to me." David covered her hand with his own, feeling the subtle warmth of her skin and the gentle vibrations that marked Etherian emotional resonance. "The scars aren't marks of heroism, Seraphina. They're evidence of the moment I realized that some people are worth bleeding for." The terrorist assault on the bunker came moments later, but this time David wasn't fighting alone. Queen Seraphina's telepathic abilities provided tactical awareness that complemented his combat skills, while her understanding of the station's quantum-dampening systems allowed them to create defensive advantages that their attackers couldn't counter. When backup finally arrived, they found David and Queen Seraphina working together with the kind of seamless cooperation that usually took years to develop. The terrorists had been neutralized, but more importantly, something had been born between two souls from different worlds, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared sacrifice, and the recognition that some connections transcend species boundaries. 3 months later, David found himself permanently assigned as Queen Seraphina's personal security liaison, a position that acknowledged both his tactical expertise and the emotional bond that had transformed professional duty into something deeper. His scars had faded but never disappeared, serving as daily reminders of the moment when a human soldier's willingness to bleed for strangers had become the foundation for a love that spanned the stars. "Do you regret them?" Queen Seraphina asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the balcony of her palace on the Etherian homeworld, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of healed wounds with the affection of someone who understood their true meaning. "Never," David replied, covering her hand with his own. "They led me to you." Her luminescent markings pulsed with the deep contentment that had become their shared emotional landscape. "Then they are the most beautiful scars in the galaxy, because they tell the story of a love that began with sacrifice and grew into something that will endure across the vastness of space and time."